Coming up on this episode, we're off to pottery class as Mary Farmer joins us to talk about her latest, Throne.
Welcome to episode 462 of the Big Gay Fiction Podcast, a show for avid readers and fans of queer romance fiction. I'm Will, and with me as always is of course my co-host and husband, Jeff.
Hello, Rainbow Romance Reader. It's great to have you here for another episode. As always, the podcast is brought to you in part by our remarkable community on Patreon. Thanks to Matters of the Heart for recently joining the community. If you'd like more information about what we offer to patrons, including the opportunity to ask questions to our guests, just like Rhonda does in this very episode, go to patreon.com/biggayfictionpodcast.
So before we get to this week's author interview, we wanted to quickly talk about our continued deep dive into the world of BL with the Thai drama Love Sea. And by sea, I mean ocean, S-E-A. In this show, Rak, a popular BL author, is sent to a beach resort to finish his latest manuscript. And Mutt, a local, is paid to keep him company and on task. I wouldn't necessarily categorize this as a true enemies to lovers scenario, but their initial dislike is pretty funny. And there's some wonderful snarky banter that hides their very deep physical attraction for one another. When the work retreat is over, they return to Bangkok together to see if there's more to their connection than just a vacation fling. And it's there, back at home, that they must cope with, frankly, villainous family members who are jealous of Rak's success. And they try their best to ruin our hero's budding love story. There's some really terrific chemistry between our two main leads, and there's even a secondary GL plot involving Rak's frazzled secretary and his actress best friend.
I enjoyed this on so many counts. I'm glad you brought up the banter, because their banter between Rak and Mutt at all times was so good. Even as they're antagonizing each other, there's this undercurrent of, I really like you, and I really want to expand this, but at the same time, I need to be, giving as good as you're giving me.
Well, it's really funny because at the beginning, Rak is frankly a little too big for his britches, and Mutt finds that very amusing and takes every opportunity to bring him down to earth.
I wondered, too, because sometimes I wonder how accurate the translations are that we're getting in the captions. And just how much better I bet that banter is when you're getting it in the native language. Just the looks they're giving each other were just excellent. The GL subplot was awesome. I loved everything about this show. And I don't know what it is. The last two BL dramas now that we've watched, this one and My Stand-In that we talked about in the last episode, there are some really bad family members in both of those dramas. It's really like, yikes.
Yeah, it's obvious we really loved Love Sea, and we think you might too. If you're interested in checking it out, you can find it on iQIYI at iq.com.
Yeah, definitely check that out. So let's get into the conversation with Mary Farmer. You're going to hear a lot about what I loved about Throne as I talk with Mary. This enemies to lovers, we must save the family estate and art school. Oh, it ticks so many boxes for me. The friction between Robbie and Toby was off the charts, as was their very deep desire for each other, even though they kind of hated having that desire. These two have such deep-seated issues that it takes a lot for them to finally open up, but when they do, it is so spectacular. Mary's going to give us all the details on Throne and the new Art of Love series, including the real-life inspiration behind it. We'll also get some details on other projects that she's working on, and, she's got recommendations for us, too. Mary, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be back. Yay.
We have got to talk about Throne. I just finished it last night. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so, so good. I'm very happy we're going to talk about it.
Thank you so much.
It's the first book in the Art of Love series. Tell folks what this story about Robbie and Toby is all about.
Well, so it's actually, because when I write my series, I like to have an overarching plot. So there's a very old British family, the Hawthorns, who have an estate that they're trying to save because, as a lot of people may know, these great big huge British estates that go back hundreds of years are very expensive to maintain. And the Hawthorne family at various points in the last 100 years has had it be a convalescent home after World War I, a la Downton Abbey. They've had it be a school in the middle of the 20th century, which a lot of them also did. And it's currently an arts center, which services the community, and they teach all sorts of different kinds of art classes. and the family also lives there. So they run into a problem at the beginning of the book where an entertainment company is wanting to buy the estate from them for a fairly decent amount of money because they want to turn it into an amusement park. For people in England, Alton Towers is a big amusement park in the UK. That is a historic estate that was bought by a company and turned into an amusement park. So there's precedent for this actually happening. And the family has to figure out how to make enough money in order to not have to sell out to the entertainment company and lose their hundreds of year old family legacy. So they hire an efficiency expert, basically from a London company, and that's Toby, to come and sort of assess what the family is doing and what more they could do. And of course, he and the one of the sons of the family, Robbie, they immediately butt heads because they're at opposite purposes. Toby is sort of working class London. He's got a lip ring, which I had fun playing with. And Robbie is grown up as part of this like aristocratic family, 20th century aristocrats, but they sort of have to work together in order to find a way to save this estate for the family. And they have such different mindsets because they come from such different backgrounds, but they're also instantly attracted to each other and hate the fact that they're instantly attracted to each other. So it's I wanted to play with the enemies to lovers trope, but also have them both be just decent human beings who ultimately really care for the issues that the other has to deal with. So that was really fun to play with.
The friction between them was so good. And the thing about it for me was they're just immediately enemies to each other because they perceive this difference between them, and yet they're for the same thing. I mean, the reader knows that Toby really wants to help the family save this place. It's what he does.
Oh yeah.
And yet those two can't see that. It's like you just want to shake them both and go, "Come on."
Well, and the thing is, I read enemies to lovers books in the past where I'm like, do these guys really have a reason to be enemies, or did the author just do this to do it? But what I wanted to do is give a legitimate reason why these guys wouldn't like each other, and it's because the moment before they meet, they each like accidentally push each other's buttons and say exactly the things that speak to their core wounds, so to speak. And it just starts off wrong because for Toby, he's always had to prove himself. He's from a working class environment. And if he wasn't being put down for being gay, he's being put down for being low class and having one of these families where it's just a mess. And a comment is made that he takes the wrong way, and then Robbie has his issues because he thinks he's not achieving enough because so many members of his family are doing great things, and he thinks that just being a teacher is not enough, even though that's what he really, really wants. And so his motivations and his worthiness are instantly called into question. And they basically spend the entire book unraveling this blow up knot that they create when they first meet. And this road trip that they go on to I didn't specify where because I didn't exactly know about the legal ramifications of just subtly mentioning the Great Pottery Throwdown. I didn't want to, like, go there, so it's a town between Birmingham and Manchester where they do a lot of pottery and have historically, and they're filming a TV show competition about ceramics. Anyone who has seen the Great Pottery Throwdown will know exactly what I mean.
I knew exactly what it was. I knew where you were. I could picture that whole thing, even right down to where he went to hang out by the river.
Yep.
Like, I know what all that is, and you just had to call it something else.
Yep. Well, just like, one of the things that I've learned as a writer, I mean, again, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I mean, there's a whole like I know people stress about, "Oh, is this fair use? Can I use this? Can I get away with it?" But my whole thing that I've discovered is readers are actually very smart, and if you just give subtle clues without actually specifying, they'll know exactly what you're talking about, and you don't have to run into any problems with copyright infringement or,
I know from reading the author's note in the book, you kind of rooted where this book came from in pottery courses that you've taken, and the idea for this series kind of jumped out of that. Tell us a little bit about that.
It did. So, as many people will know, I guess the last 12 months or so have been really, really rough for people's mental health. And right about Christmas time, which I, despite my name, do not do well with Christmas time. Long family issues, just me and Christmas do not mix. So I was thinking, what can I do to make it through this long winter and just, you know, keep my mental health in good order? And years and years ago, I had taken this a pottery class at a local. It's funny because of the place where I'm taking Abington Arts Center in Pennsylvania, it is a Victorian estate that was turned into an arts center when the family donated it. I don't know who they donated it to, but it's they teach various different ceramics, painting, jewelry making, all this different stuff. So I signed up for a class and it taking this ceramics class and doing pottery again after years, it was such a lifesaver to my mental health because I started to realize a few things very quickly, which historically in my life, going back to when I was 10 years old, writing has been my hobby. But when your hobby becomes the way that you make a living, and when sales start to go down for various different reasons and it becomes stressful and you're not sure of what you're writing, you need some other creative outlet because because you've made your creativity into a business, that doesn't mean you don't need another creative outlet. So just being able to go down into the pottery studio with people who are not connected to the writer world and play with clay and do projects and actually make something tangible and beautiful and to learn new skills, it really saved my mental health this past winter. And then I started talking to the people who worked there, and we would sit down there and they would tell these stories about the crazy things that have happened at the arts center, both with other teachers, both with like students and who what they would do. And after a while, I was just like, this is brilliant. I have to find a way to take a lot of these stories that they're telling me, or like the spirit of the stories that they're telling me, and like these would make great books. So I've just implemented like not, there's that whole thing of you don't want to like use somebody's story exactly because you never know how that can go. But just the inner workings of a place like that, I was so entertained by it. So, I was finishing up my Brotherhood Legacy series, which is the contemporary version of my historical Brotherhood, and I thought I definitely wanna do another MM contemporary series because I'm just really enjoying this. And just the different possibilities for the different artistic disciplines. And one I was actually explaining this to some of my so the studio, not only do you have your art classes there, but they allow for open studio. So you can just go down into the studio and it's like a great community of artists that I'm now a part of. So I was telling them, so yeah, I've got this book coming out, Throne. It's like my pottery based MM romance, and which they think is hysterical. And I explained the naming conventions for this series, like Throne is the pottery one. Painted is the one that's going to be about painting. There's one coming up, Forged, which is metalwork. The last one that I have a cover for, but it's not going to be the last in the series, is Blown, which I think is, yuck, yuck, yuck. But it's glass blowing. And so then people started coming up with other titles that I could use farther down the line. And it's just like this classroom full of women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s coming up with titles for this series. Oiled was a fun one that somebody came up with. Oh, there was another one that was just absolutely just wild that I can't remember it right now. But I was like, I can't use that. That's way too raunchy. But yeah, one woman in particular was having fun coming up with these. But so we might get to see some of these ideas manifested later on down the roads. To summarize, me going off on a tangent, it was just something that had really helped my mental health. It sparked this great idea, and I was like, I got to do that.
What's it that led you to pottery?
I come from a family with a lot of artists in it. Again, like 20 years ago, I took the almost same class at the same place, and it was just fun playing with clay. I always enjoyed art classes in school. And so it was that whole because I knew what it was, I knew where it was, I was familiar with the studio, even though when I got down there, I was like, "Oh, this looks totally different than I remember it." Also have a cousin who is like a world-class ceramicist. Like, her stuff is amazing. I will never be that good. but she'll never be able to write books like me. So, yeah. But yeah, I come from a family of artists. We've all done art at various different points.
I know from watching Great Pottery Throwdown that you can make a lot of things out of clay and
Oh yeah.
in ceramic work. What kinds of things are you making as you take the class and even work in studio?
Well, I am terrible at pottery throwing, despite the title of the book, and I threw in for my dear friend Amy Patel, I threw in that ghost reference scene like towards the end of the book. That was for just for her because she said you can't write a pottery throwing book without that scene. So I do what is called slab building, which I don't know, again, if you've seen the Great Pottery Shed, and you roll out along a big sheet of clay, and I've actually made some of my own molds, so you, like, lay it over the mold, and you can make bowls, you can make anything like boxes. I made a really great butter dish that I gave away to my brother, and I in this fall session that's coming up, I'm gonna make a three-tiered fountain like they've done on Pottery Throwdown. We'll see how that goes. They they do that project towards the end quite frequently, and it doesn't always work out for
That
them.
is very true. That doesn't sometimes work out, and neither does building the working sink or toilet.
Oh, yeah.
People have
Again,
issues with that occasionally.
for those who haven't seen the show, the semifinal project is always either a sink or a toilet.
Fit for purpose.
Yep.
I
Ugh.
absolutely want to go to Hawthorne House. I mean, it just sounds amazing. What were you looking at in terms of like research or things that you based it on, what you wanted that property to be?
Well, interestingly enough, so it's actually a couple of things. For those who don't know, I am in England right now, and I am about 500 yards away from Hatfield House, where if anybody happened to get the uncorrected arc of this book, I accidentally Freudian slip wrote Hatfield House instead of Hawthorne House at one point in the book, and it's this beautiful estate that's like right up the hill from me. And a little bit that, but last summer I also went to it's Leeds Castle, but it's actually an estate in Kent, which is nowhere near Leeds. And at Leeds Castle, they've actually converted a big part of the grounds into like they've got a hedge maze, they've got a mini golf course, they have a giant sand pit for little kids. It just they have all sorts of events and things there. So really Hawthorne House was like an amalgamation of a bunch of the big British estates that I've toured at various different points because they all these people again they're very expensive to maintain, so they have to do other things with the property. And Hawthorne House, not only is it an arts center, they hold a Renaissance fair there on certain weekends in the summer, and that's like a lot of these places will only do their activities on weekends during the summer. But for those who don't know, when I was just out of high school in the mid 1990s, I worked at the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair, and it
Oh,
was
fun.
one of the most fun things that I've ever done in my life, but it's crazy. Those people are crazy. So, I don't know if you've heard the whole thing of the Venn diagram of where people who play D&D and D and people who go to Renaissance fairs is a circle. So, that's basically it's it's funny because those are my people, and that was when I was, like, 18, 19, and then I got a life happened, and I got away from all of those people and, like, all the things like, I think I was accidentally dating a girl while I was at the Renaissance Fair, but, like, that was so not even on my radar that I wouldn't have known what to do anyhow. And then years later sort of come full circle and, "Oh, hey, like, this is the exact same group of people. We're just all old now." So well, older, but
I
yeah.
loved the joust. The visitors could take part in a joust and how you had that kind of staged up to make it a safe joust for for the visitors. But I also love how Toby and Robbie just got to wail on each other a little
Well,
bit.
that's actually based on of course, writers take stuff from all over their life all the time. That is actually something we used to do in my elementary school gym class.
Oh,
Believe it or
wow.
not. We had those, like, giant things that looked like a Q-tip, but they were out you could just, like, wail on each other with them because it was the '80s. We just wailed on each other all the time and nobody cared. And we had these little pushy cart things and we would do that. We would go zipping across the gym and then like wail on each other. It was I don't know what gym teacher came up with that idea, but I remember that vividly from elementary school when I was in the '80s. So yeah, that's based on something real too. I elaborated it for the purpose of the joust in this book. But yeah,
It
I really like
totally
those
made sense as a way to have adults being able to safely joust, while the professionals did it over there somewhere.
books. And wouldn't like didn't don't you just wanna do that? Can't you just think of somebody who you would just wanna, like, do the whole joust? Like, in the book, they use pool noodles at first and, like, whack on somebody with pool noodles. Yeah.
And then they figured out that that was maybe a little too, flirty to be wailing on each other, which was
Yeah.
so awesome.
Yeah, it got a little bit heated, shall we say, and
Mm.
poor Toby and Robbie, so
You play with so many tropes so well here. I mean, there's the overall enemies to lovers, but then there's the road trip, and there's a little forced proximity, one bed scenario going on. How did you bring together all of that material? Was it just the way that it kind of sorted out as you were going, or did you plot all that out?
Oh, I'm the plottiest plotter who ever plotted, but I oftentimes I have like a multi-tier process for writing a book. And when I tell people, well, how long did it take you to write a book? I was like, well, I can draft it in 2 weeks. But that doesn't, that's the tip of the iceberg of all the time I think about it and outline and make notes for it and like shuffle tropes around. Years and years ago, well, I guess it's not that many years ago now, I read, is it Theodora Taylor's book about universal fantasies? And she just
Mm.
talked about tropes and things like that, and it's sort of like, she's got something she's onto something here. And so I do honestly, I'll confess, what I like to do is go there's certain Facebook groups where readers can ask for requests of what books they "Hey guys, I wanna read a book with this, and this trope." I pay attention to the tropes that people are saying they really want to read, and I sort of steer things towards those tropes because I mean, I love writing and I just want to tell these stories and I just have fun doing it, but I also need to pay the rent. So it's nice to write something that I'm pretty sure will sell and people will actually like and tell their friends about. I mean, I guess there's no shame in writing something that you know people will buy when you're doing it as to make a living. But that's also why I wrote my Peter and the Wolves books because those are just writing for myself, and lo and behold, a lot of other people like them too. But, like, when I talk about my quote unquote "workbooks," then I I I have to you have to balance marketability with creativity and love, because if you just write something wildly creative that you just love so much, sometimes it'll hit and you'll be able to pay the rent. And sometimes it's just not going to be what people want to read. I'll confess that I kind of pulled back from writing historical romance because there's not a huge market for it. And since I want to primarily I've written and but I'm pretty sure I want to just switch entirely to now, but I need to still pay the rent. But I have another Brotherhood series that's just, like, middle of the 19th century, and I have, like, 2 full outlines, I have 4 covers. I just don't know when I'm gonna have time to write it because I need to write the things that are bringing in income right now. I hate that. But I love the books that I'm writing because of it, so it's only a small hate. So,
It's only a small hate.
like, I hate having to think about these things consciously, but, "Oh, hey, wait, I really actually love this idea after all." So this is what it's like. This is when you have to do this as your business. You can't necessarily continue to just think of it as a hobby, as much as I would like to.
I don't wanna get too spoilery, but I do have to know about the finale a little bit.
Okay,
It was such a thrill to read of the takedown of the person who was trying to take over Hawthorne House.
yeah.
Was it as much fun to write? Because
Oh my
it
gosh,
was
it
like
was
just
so much fun.
page-turning deliciousness happening.
As I said before we started recording, I feel so insecure about writing contemporary because I don't have the proof that I'm good at it to a certain extent like I do with historical. But I got there to that part. I was like, this is what has to happen. Is this too silly? Is this too out there? Nah, I'm gonna throw it in there anyhow because this is the kind of thing you would see at the end of a British rom-com where I will not give out super spoily specific details, but the main characters get help from some very colorful characters who because I tell people this book is brotherhood adjacent. So they end up at the Chameleon Club, which for those who have read any of my Brotherhood books know that's the central location in London where members of the Brotherhood hang out. They end up there and they get some help. And I just, like, heard the Benny Hill soundtrack in the back of my mind as these guys were going because yeah, I had so much fun writing that, yes. Well, it's one of those things where I knew where I needed to get by the end of the book. I knew where I needed to have this one end before I pick up the continuing story in the next book, but it was like, "Oh, so how am I gonna get there?" And then these guys just sort of popped into my head, and I'm like, we may not have seen the last of them just because they were so much fun to write. So much fun.
I hope they get to come back at some point because they were fun and, they helped make that finale just sing.
Oh, good, good.
So, what's a favorite scene for you from Throne?
Oh gosh, I really like the scene in the hotel room after they've been to the bar, and they're starting to get it on, and things are finally getting all spicy and wonderful. And in my outline, if you read the outline, that was supposed to be sexy times all the way. And then I realized these guys are so drunk. This is not going to happen. So it actually ended up being a lot of fun to write. Just very drunk trying to get home from the pub. Finally, something's going to happen between them. And just alcohol and, sexy times with your enemy to lovers trapped in one bed just don't mix. So.
No, but then it just let all of that stuff just keep stretching out before they finally got themselves sorted. Because it's kind of I don't know if anybody would call it officially a slow burn, but the way that they just had to keep peeling back on each other and how long it took, you just get these little bit more, it's like, "Oh, oh, yeah, go, go. Oh, no, not yet, sorry."
It's like that. It's for them too, but each how shall I say this? Each false start just opens up another layer to the onion and makes it a much bigger problem to solve. If that
No.
makes sense without being too spoilery. So
Yeah, I think it does. You mentioned, Painted is coming right out. It comes out in just a few months, November 22nd. Tell us a little bit about Reese and Early. We meet them in this book. They get the epilogue in this book. What do we get in Painted?
oh, I'm not 100% sure yet because I'm still
Okay,
in
that's fair.
and once I sit down again, like I got so off of you know what? I don't know what it is. My last 3 or 4 books that I've written, I've gotten so far off outline once I sit down and start to write. But what I really wanted to play with for Painted is so Early is really questioning his gender and well, I should say they non-binary, and it's been very difficult for them because their family does not accept it. So because they work for the Hawthorne family, the Hawthorns kind of like take them in and give them a safe place to figure all these things out, which for Reese presents him with a big moral dilemma because he's older by quite a bit than Early, but so attracted to them. And then that's confusing for him. The whole workplace, because technically it's a workplace romance. There's the questions for him of whether he's taking advantage of Early. Early again is just so confused but has always had a thing for Reese, and it's sort of like when a relationship is just so wrong but so right at the same time, and lines are crossed in the middle of that book, and it's sort of going to have to be about where do you if you've made a mistake, can you recover a relationship and like just like the ethics of being in a relationship these days, especially with people who are questioning their whole identity and have nowhere else to go. Where is the line between caring for somebody and helping them and taking advantage of them? No, and then of course it's like for both of them. I wanted to play off of that whole thing. They've like been painted with the same brush sort of a thing because have to tie in the art to the whole thing. But yeah, that one might actually end up being a little more serious than this one. I'm not sure yet.
Mm, okay.
Maybe. We'll see.
I like the glimpses that we got, and then like I said, a little bit more in the epilogue, finding out about them.
I'm gonna have early something that is like has always been a bucket list thing for me. I don't know if I'll ever do it, but I've always wanted to. This is ridiculous. I've always wanted to pose nude for a live model art class. I don't know why, but I think that would be fun. So at some point, Early's gonna have to pose for Reese's class.
Oh wow. Okay,
Shenanigans may end up happening that way. We'll see. So
probably. You teased us like 4 books for Art of Love that you kind of mentioned, but that you saw it going further. Do you have a sense on how big this series might get?
well, this is a terrible thing to say, but I like to just keep writing in a world until I get tired of it or readers get tired of it. But I love working with the like family dynamics and this family, the Hawthorne family, they are already taking on so much character that I did not initially intend to do. Characters just take on a life of their own, and this entire family has taken on a life of their own because the parents are very, very like 1960s British liberal sort of a thing, like, they're very, like, the British version of hippies and are all into just experimenting. The parents have had an open relationship with both sexes, and the kids have been raised well, I wanted to play with the idea of the kids and have been raised without any preconceived notions of what you should or shouldn't do in a relationship. So, like, how does that affect the way you go into relationships as an adult? I wanna play with that idea throughout this series too. But, of course, there's gotta be cousins and, just people who hang around the family, do different things like that. I just really, really like the family, and I like having I guess, a vehicle to play with all these different tropes that I'm excited about, and I was like, "Ooh, let me write more about that and see if I can figure out how I feel about that trope."
Mhm.
There's so much going on in the world, and there's so many things just to write about, and I don't know, I just love writing, man. Just write all the books all the time. So, oh,
We got a question from Rhonda, who's a member of our Patreon community. And this kind of ties back to a little bit of things you were talking about before, because you did bring the Brotherhood into more of the modern era during the Legacy series. And Rhonda was just kind of curious, what brought about that decision? And I think you hinted at it a little bit a second
well,
ago with, just that historical in MM's not doing as well right now as it perhaps had in the past.
it is a really woo-woo story, actually. So, I came up with the idea for the Brotherhood Legacy while I was on a cruise in the Bahamas, and if anyone who knows me, I love cruises. We were parked at Royal Caribbean has their own little island in the Bahamas, and it was one of those things where everybody else had gotten off the ship, but I stayed on the ship and I was doing some free writing. I had like my tablet and I was just sort of writing down, like sort of journaling, sort of coming up with story ideas. And I was sitting there looking out over this beautiful turquoise water with this cobalt blue sky. And it just sort of popped into my head. Gee, I wonder what the Brotherhood is doing now. Like, because I'd had them in the 19th century and they had the organization. I talked about how it was started, things that they're doing in the Victorian era and the Chameleon Club and their purpose for each other. And I was just like, I wonder what all these guys are doing now because obviously the Brotherhood still exists. So, like, what does that look like? Along with the thought of, you know what? The real money in MM romances and contemporary, which was not the major concern, but I just wanted to try something new and different, and that just little question, wonder what these guys are doing now because clearly it still exists, and then I was like, "Well, are women able to join the Brotherhood now? And how did they make it through the '80s and the AIDS epidemic?" And, like, all of these different questions. So by writing that contemporary series, I got to sort of in my own mind, I don't know if all of it made it to the page, sort of think about the progression of what the Brotherhood became from where it started. Because obviously in the 19th century, it had to be a secret organization. But after the 1970s, it didn't have to be a secret anymore. So how would that have changed the organization? So yeah, I just wanted to play with see like these ideas, these story ideas and the characters and the worlds that I don't know where they come from, but like they're so real to me. I actually just want to know more about stuff. So I go looking for the answers. That's that's a that's just such a hippie answer. But yeah.
How was it shifting gears after so much historical? You mentioned that you still feel a little skittish writing and the
Yeah,
reaction to contemporary.
it was very daunting because I don't necessarily feel like I am very good at writing contemporary, which may sound like a ridiculous thing, but that's not where I got my start. That's not how I built my audience. So I'm so insecure about whether the contemporary books that I'm writing are any good because I haven't been doing it for that long. And it's more of a challenge for me, but I like the challenge. I like trying to write something that's not just like, oh, yeah, I can write this in my sleep. Because when you get too complacent about your writing, I think that's when it could go stale.
Did you have to
So
like shift mindset or anything, or just tell
I,
contemporary stories? I say that as if it's the easiest thing to do, just to go tell a
uh,
contemporary story instead.
well, it's this year, I don't know why I'm doing it, but I've been going every other for books. I've actually got 3 series running right now. An MF historical romantasy because it's not the actual historical timeline. This MM contemporary series, and I've got my Omegaverse series. And for some stupid reason, I keep shifting between them, and it's like jerking my brain in one direction and then jerking it in another. And by the end of this year, I'll only have 2 series running, so maybe that'll be easier. But who knows? This is why I do so much pre-writing and outlining and thinking about stuff and just going off on long walks and daydreaming about stuff that's going on. You need to do the prep work before you do the full writing to just shift mindset a little bit. Yeah.
Mhm.
This time I shifted countries to write this book that I'm working on now. That was a big mindset shift.
Why did you put Throne and Hawthorne House in the UK rather than setting it where the inspiration happened?
Well, because it was kind of inspiration from over here as well, like visiting all of those big estates, and I did wanna connect it to the Brotherhood. I don't know, I'm big at connecting everything that I write. I mean, I've published over 200 books at this point across several different genres, and I think about 85% of them are connected. So I like to connect, and I am such an Anglophile, and if I could, I would move over here tomorrow, but they don't have a visa for me because they got rid of the artist's visa in 2012. I'm really hoping they'll bring something like that back in the next couple of years. And I also have a pretty large fan base in the UK who want to read books that I've actually had them say, "I'm so glad you write books that are set in the UK because I'm just so used to reading everything in the US, and it's really nice to have them over here." So, yay.
Nice. I like that. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about what's going on in your Omegaverse writing with the
Oh
MM
my
Farmer
gosh.
name.
So I years ago, I was like, Omegaverse is weird. I'm never even gonna read that. It's just too weird of a concept. Men getting pregnant? What? That's weird. And then I started reading some. And then I read Ro Horvat's Precious, and it was like, oh, that's it. I'm gonna have to write this now. And the Forbidden Desire series by Piper Scott and Virginia Kelly. Although I don't have shifters in mind, but like I read those and I was like, now I'm in love with this genre, rats. So the first series I wrote, Bangers and Mash, that was I call it Fluffy Omegaverse. And it's more like sweet stories, sometimes lower angst. They're kind of fun. But I got to the end of that series and I was just sort of again looking around at what people want, what things are popular, what I've been interested in terms of my own reading lately. And I was like, I'm going to write a dark Omegaverse series. So I have this series, Omegas After Dark, where so I did the Perfect Match Agency series with Ro and Wendy Rathbone, which is like a matchmaking service. And I was like, what if there was like a grinder app for alphas and omegas who had these dark fantasies and they wanted to play out some like really heavy dark stuff. So I'm having so much fun writing these really, really erotic, really raunchy, dark books with just wild stuff happening. And like the first book in that series, his Hunter, was Primal Play, which I I had so much fun writing. And it's like, please don't ever let well, thank my mother has passed away, but if she was still alive, I'd like, do not let my mom know I'm writing this, whatever you do. But it's fun. And it's been very well received. I'm so pleased people are liking these wildly erotic, very raunchy, super steamy books. Yay. The one I'm writing right now is going to top the other two. Just in case anyone was wondering, his master, it's way out there. So it's fun. I enjoy it. Other people enjoy reading it. So, but boy, is it fun.
That's great. I mean, you're having so much fun. I could hear it in your voice. You talk about, writing these fun stories.
Well, I mean, I love it. I have always, since I was 10 years old, sitting in my third grade class every day, just crossing my fingers and wishing that the teacher would assign a creative writing assignment. And then this voice from the beyond said, you don't have to wait for Mr. Morley, who was my teacher, to assign a creative writing assignment. You could just write something. And it's like, that was one of those moments that just changed my life because I love it. And I've been doing it for 40 years now, and it's gotten me through a lot of really difficult stuff in my life. I am not playing life on easy mode. There's just been a lot of stuff that's happened, but I've always had writing I've actually had therapists say, you do realize that you have basically done self therapy through your writing for most of your adult life. And it's like, I love it so much. I can't imagine not ever writing. So I was at one of my first writers conferences that I ever went to like 25 years ago. I was talking to one of the guys who was a presenter. He was talking about writing and, doing it. And I just was talking to him. It's like, I could no more stop writing than I could stop breathing. And he looked at me in the eyes and said, then you're going to be a success because that's what it takes. And I was just so flattered, but he was right. So, but then there's Barbara Cartland, who is one of the grand dames of early romance novels, who was writing until she was 98. And I just met somebody who knew her the other day. Go figure. Yeah, up here at Hatfield House, I went to an outdoor performance of Henry V. It was very posh. It was very good too. But she was writing until she was 98, and that's my goal. So I love it. I don't ever want to stop. I'll have to go through about 9 more genres before I kick the bucket because there's just, well, that's the other thing too. I'm not going to be writing MF anymore because I just feel like I've run out of things to say in MF. I mean, I have this one series that I'm working on that I need to finish, 2 more books, and a publisher just picked it up. So maybe they'll want me to do more. Who knows? But I just love it. Yeah, I just do. So, I mean, and then that's just those are just my workbooks. Like that's not even getting into my Peter and the Wolves world, which is just I purely write that for myself because I love those characters and I love that world. I got their names tattooed on my body because I love them so much. So,
And for people who are watching on YouTube, they got to see a little flash of the tattoo there. Yeah, right
Peter
there on the
Agnes
shoulder.
Leo. So, yeah, it is who I am. I don't know what I would do if suddenly I couldn't write anymore.
You touched a little bit on what's coming up in Art of Love. Is there anything else that you wanna kinda give us a heads up on that's coming towards the end of this year and as 2025 gets started?
Oh, well, I think again, by the end of this year, I will just be concentrated on the Art of Love and my Omegas After Dark series. I don't quite know what I want to do after those yet because I'm still having so much fun with those 2 series. There's a couple of charity anthology projects that I'll be doing, but I'm going to try to tie them into those series. So we'll see. But who knows what strange and unusual ideas will hit me next and what tangents I'll go off on. But just oh, there's so many great things out there to write.
And shifting from great things to write, love to know about some great things that you're reading or watching. What have you got to recommend to our listeners?
Well, I mean, I just finished watching the Olympics because that's when we're recording this, but so that took up a lot of time for a while. But, again, this summer has been so difficult on my mental health with everything. Like, I am really sensitive to noise level, like, not like actual physical noise, but like the noise that's been going on social media with everybody getting upset about something, and it's like, can we go 2 months or 2 weeks without a major earth-shattering, world-changing event? So I've actually been rereading a lot of favorites as comfort reads. I've been rereading Taylor J. Gray's Street Boys series, which she just finished, like, for the 5th or 6th time. I'm lucky. She's a very, very, very good friend of mine who I just hung out with here last weekend. So I've been beta reading all of those books before they've hit the market. So like I'll read it once, she'll do her revisions, and I'll read it again and give the thumbs up. And then when it comes out, I'll read it a third time. But in terms of new books that I've just finished reading, I finally got around to reading the Captive Prince trilogy because I've been worried that my Peter and the Wolves books are too similar to this world, and maybe people would say, "Oh, but you're copying her." They aren't. It's the same general concept of non-magical fantasy, historical feeling, political intrigue, but mine are way less intense than hers, but still with the political machinations. I have all sorts of opinions on those books. Some I'm willing to share and some I'm not because I don't want people to throw tomatoes at me. I almost did not complete reading the 3rd book because I got really mad at it at one point. But I love the world that she's built so much. It's really cool. There are people out there who love these books more than I do, but I do like them. So, but I've often found, like, for me in my particular reading tastes, the books that everybody just absolutely loves and goes nuts over, I'm like, yeah, yeah, it's okay. And a lot of them there's been a lot of really popular MM books that I've started reading, and I'm like, I just can't read this. But that's, as my dad used to say, that's why Baskin Robbins makes 39 flavors or however many they make.
Yep.
Just not every book is for every reader, and that's okay. I'm just always afraid that I'm going to offend people by saying I just really didn't like their favorite book ever.
It can be a risk. Yeah. I tend to only talk about the things that I do love, and the things I have opinions on, only Will gets to hear about those.
Yeah.
So tell everyone best way to keep up with you online so they can know more about, as the art of love continues and all the other stuff you've got going on across the pen names.
Well, I mean, it's always good to sign up for my newsletter because I always say I'm just going to send it out when I have a new release, but then I keep coming up with reasons to just like, hey guys, guess what? Guess what? And I sometimes send out vacation pictures with that. My Facebook group, though, is probably the place where I am most active. That's, Mary Farmer Readers Group, Mary's Little Lambs. So I post a lot in there. And I have some very active community members in my group who post some very funny things too. I appreciate them for that. And I am also on Instagram, but like more than that is just too much for me. So,
Totally understand. Mary, it has been so fun talking to you about Throne.
um,
I can't wait to get painted in a couple months and
me
just
either.
wish you all the success on this new series.
Oh, thank you so much. I just love it. It's been fun.
This episode's transcript has been brought to you by our community on Patreon. If you'd like to read the conversation for yourself, head on over to the show notes page for this episode at biggayfictionpodcast.com. We've got links to everything that we've talked about in this episode.
And thanks so much to Mary for telling us all about the new Art of Love series. I really hope you'll pick up Throne if you haven't already. It is so very good. Meanwhile, I've already got Painted on pre-order, so I can get that as soon as it's released. Now let's get another take on the interview. Hey ChatGPT, I'd love to know what you thought of the conversation with Mary.
Sure, Jeff. Here's what I found interesting in your interview with Mary. Mary's discussion about how her personal experiences, particularly her involvement in a pottery class, significantly influenced the creation of Throne was fascinating. She delved into how this creative outlet helped her mental health and how the stories she encountered during these classes inspired the settings and dynamics in the book. The integration of personal life into creative work adds depth to the story and showcases how real-life experiences can shape fictional narratives. Also, Mary's strategic approach to writing, particularly her use of popular tropes like enemies to lovers, road trips, and forced proximity, was another intriguing aspect. She mentioned how she pays attention to what readers want and steers her writing to align with those desires while maintaining her creativity. This balance between artistic expression and marketability is a smart move that reflects her understanding of the romance genre and her audience. And finally, Mary's transition from historical to contemporary romance, particularly with her Brotherhood Legacy series, was noteworthy. She candidly discussed her insecurities about writing contemporary stories despite her success in historical romance. This shift was driven by both personal curiosity and market demands, illustrating her adaptability as a writer and her willingness to explore new challenges, even when they push her out of her comfort zone. These points highlight Mary's creative process, her strategic thinking as an author, and her willingness to evolve as a writer, all of which made for a compelling conversation.
So I really appreciate how chat picked up on how much we all got to understand about Mary and her process, from using her pottery class as the spark that led to the Art of Love series, and on how she's kind of unsure still about writing contemporary, even though she's written quite a few now. And I can tell you, she does contemporary just as awesomely as she does historical. And of course, she shared a lot about her personal and business thinking too, and how all that combined into why she shifted to contemporary. I really enjoyed talking with her all about that.
All right, I think that'll do it for now. Coming up next on Monday, September 23rd, we're revisiting one of our favorite books as we talk about Lequet's Under His Protection.
I always love a good romantic suspense, and Under His Protection is one of the absolute best. If you haven't picked up that yet, you should really go get it and have a read so you'll be ready for our in-depth discussion.
On behalf of Jeff and myself, we want to thank you so much for listening, and we hope that you'll join us again soon for more discussions about the kinds of stories we all love, the big gay fiction kind. Until then, keep turning those pages and keep reading. Big Gay Fiction Podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more shows you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. Original theme music by Daryl Banner.